everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to start off by thanking Eric for opening up our program and for his support. You know, he ran a terrific campaign last year for the House of Delegates, and after hearing that speech, I have a sneaking suspicion that we may be gathered someday in the future at a Brescia campaign kickoff event. I'd certainly like to see that, and let me just state right now that I would be honored to repay the favor by speaking at the campaign kickoff event, and I would hope to do that as the sitting congressman in the 8th District. I'd also like to thank my good friend Charles Hokinson for his kind introduction, and also for serving as our campaign treasurer. It's a thankless job, but he's doing a wonderful job, and I really appreciate that. And most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you who came out today to join us, especially on such a nice day outside. You know, I think we've come together because we share a deep and abiding concern about the future direction of this country. We see the federal government running up a $1.5 trillion budget deficit this year, and we're on track to run up about $12 trillion of debt in the next 10 years. Unemployment is at an alarming 9.7%. We've witnessed large-scale government intervention in the auto industry, the banking industry, the housing industry, and now, lately, the healthcare industry. President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Jim Moran are trying to pass a cap-and-trade bill that will cause our electricity rates to skyrocket and will send millions of jobs overseas to India and China. They're trying to pass a card check bill that will take away from workers their ability to have a secret ballot in union elections. And they're trying to allow the Bush tax cuts to expire, which will cause income taxes, taxes on small business, capital gains taxes, dividends taxes, and the death tax to all increase. And as Eric mentioned, there's even talk of a new value-added tax on top of all the other taxes that we pay. Unfortunately, the picture is no prettier when it comes to national security and foreign policy. We see a return to the days when terrorism is treated as a law enforcement problem. The administration wants to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his co-conspirators in a civilian courtroom rather than military tribunals. They Mirandize a Christmas Day bomber after only 50 minutes of interrogation. And in the after-action report on the terrible tragedy at Fort Hood, they can't even bring themselves to mention the motive for that murder, that mass murder, Islamic extremism. The administration's also unfortunately undermining our critical alliances abroad. They've brought our relationship with our strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel, to its lowest point in decades. They've strained our special relationship with the United Kingdom through a series of slights. They hung our friends out in Poland and the Czech Republic out to dry on the issue of missile defense. They threw our friends in Honduras overboard in order to stand up for a Hugo Chavez wannabe. And they've abandoned our friends in Colombia, our strongest ally in South America, by failing to push for ratification of the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. And at the same time we're failing to stand by our friends, we're failing to stand up to our adversaries and on behalf of American values. We're failing to take effective action to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And after the brutal post-election violence in that country, we fail to speak with strength and clarity on behalf of democracy and human rights. Our efforts to bring North Korea's nuclear program to a halt have failed miserably. And when it comes to dealing with the genocidal regime in the Sudan, which is led by an indicted war criminal, the administration's special envoy to the Sudan had this to say, and I want to get the quote exactly right. We've got to think about giving out cookies. Kids, countries, they react to gold stars, smiley faces, handshakes, agreements, talk, engagement. It's as if our foreign policy is now inspired by Barney the dinosaur. Now, the Republican Party is often criticized these days for being the party of no. But when we see our country headed in the wrong direction, it is our patriotic duty as the loyal opposition to say just that, no. And if you send me to Congress, that's what I'll do. In 2011, if President Obama proposes another budget that will pass on trillions of dollars of debt to our children and our grandchildren, Jim Moran will say yes, and I will say no. If the Democrats propose spending bills filled with thousands of pork barrel earmarks, Jim Moran will say yes, and then he'll ask that he get as many earmarks as his first campaign contributors as possible, and I will say no. And if President Obama tries to move Guantanamo detainees to the city of Alexandria, Jim Moran will say yes, And I, along with Republicans, Democrats, and independents in Alexandria, will say, hell no. But just saying no isn't enough. On those occasions where I believe that President Obama is right, rare though they may be, I will not hesitate to support him, because we must always put country ahead of party. For example, President Obama made the right call last year when he decided to send more troops to Afghanistan to halt the Taliban resurgence. And Jim Moran made the wrong call when he opposed President Obama on that, and when he even went further by calling for the unilateral withdrawal of American troops from that country. In addition, I agree with President Obama's decision to allow oil and natural gas exploration off the coast of Virginia. Offshore drilling is a win-win-win proposition. It will help make America energy independent, create Virginia jobs, and produce revenue for Northern Virginia transportation projects. And instead of having a congressman like Jim Moran, who's going to oppose offshore drilling tooth and nail, we need to have a congressman whose top priority will be to fight to make sure that we get our fair share of the revenues for transportation projects. The Gulf states get 37.5% of the royalties right now, and we should get at least that much when Virginia's coast is drilled off of. Now, beyond supporting President Obama in those instances where he gets it right, it is also critical that we offer our own alternative vision for moving our country in the right direction. First and foremost, that means bringing spending and the budget deficit under control. And that means tackling the exploding cost of entitlement programs. Now, some people say it's too politically difficult to tackle the entitlement programs. It's like the third rail of American politics. But we have to do that because they are the primary cause of our long-term fiscal problems. And if we act now, we can solve the problems with reasonably modest changes. But if we wait 10 or 15 years, as Eric said, we're going to find ourselves in the crisis that Greece finds itself today. But there's going to be one critical difference. There's not going to be a Germany there to bail us out. I've set forth specific ideas for entitlement reform on my website, berry2010.com, and I invite you to go to the site's fiscal responsibility section and review them. There are other things that we should do to return fiscal responsibility to Washington. To give a few examples, it's time to stop any new expenditures in the TARP program, and all the money repaid from that program should be used for deficit reduction. Earmarks should be abolished once and for all, and wasteful subsidies to corporate agribusiness should be ended. With unemployment at 9.7%, we also need to present an aggressive agenda for creating jobs. My philosophy when it comes to job creation is simple. You can't have employees without employers. So given that we're now competing in a global marketplace, we need to have the best business climate in the world so that companies will choose to locate, expand, and invest in the United States. For example, we can no longer afford to have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. Something is seriously wrong when our tax rate is higher than that of countries like France, Sweden, Germany, the United Kingdom. And that's why we should cut it from 35 to 20%. We need to do everything that we can to make sure the Bush tax cuts are extended, because if they're not, taxes on small business and investment, really taxes on job creation, will increase. We need to fight to open up foreign markets to American goods, and that's why we should immediately ratify the free trade agreements with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia, because more American exports mean more American jobs. And finally, we must fight to protect Virginia's right to work law and to oppose anti-business proposals such as card check. Now, I grew up in the state of Michigan, so I've seen firsthand what happens to the economy of a state when unions are given too much power. And we can't let that happen in Virginia. When it comes to energy and the environment, I believe that we must be responsible stewards of the earth. We should seek to pass on to the next generation a cleaner planet than we inherited. But that doesn't mean signing on to the Democrats' cap and trade agenda that will destroy millions of American jobs and have virtually no effect on the environment. And it doesn't mean basing energy policy on outdated and baseless fears. For example, if we want to reduce carbon emissions, the single best way to do that is through nuclear power. And I don't say these words often, but if France can do it, so can we.